Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. So when you signed up for this workshop, you saw that it was being given by myself as well as Steve Varela. Sadly, Steve had a death in the family, and so he is not able to be here. But have no fear, I'm able to say many of the things he would have said because we worked together on a piece of this. I don't have his hair, but I have some of his knowledge. So I'm just curious, how many of you have done, let's see, so how many of you have done a peer observation before? Okay. And so hopefully today's workshop will offer some ways to do it even better. And for those of you who have not done it at all, you will leave with a lot of tools. And again, not just theoretical knowledge, but some actual hands-on practice. And you'll see what I mean by that. And so the main source of information that you have for this is we have a CTEL webpage on peer observation. If you go to the CTEL homepage, you see that one of the resources here is peer observation. You click on it, and you have this here where there's context of the original proposal, and you have instruments, and you have further discussion and recommendations. But you're going to get a whole lot more, of course, by being here today. But just so that you know that you have something you can point your colleagues to. And in fact, this very workshop is being recorded, as you can see, and will be posted to this very page as yet a further resource, again, for your colleagues who were not able to join us today. Okay, so first, what are some of the potential benefits of peer observation? Glad you asked. It allows us to do continuous improvement, whether our own teaching, our department's offerings, our program. So there's that vehicle that can be used. It's a way just to get ideas from each other because, I mean, it's kind of weird that teaching is what we spend as much time doing as any other one thing, and yet we know so little about what happens behind the closed doors of our colleagues. You know, I learn more about what my colleagues do sometimes if we're both at the same national conference and I get to sit on their talk than I do being able to just kind of go, you know. So it's a nice excuse to be able to get to know what we each do. By having peer observation as opposed to like having an administrator several ranks above us observe us, our peers get the specifics of our content area, the challenges that come with it, the objectives that come with it, the methodology, and so as well as the academic unit goals. And so that's another big plus to having peers do the observing. Also, again, it makes the faculty teaching role more visible. You know, when people see how much goes into good teaching, it's not like the legislators who think that, oh, we're just teaching 9 hours and the rest of the week we're off. You know, it's a lot more to it. And then, of course, it can be also a source of dossier documentation of teaching for formal purposes like promotion and tenure or awards such as the Rhoda, et cetera. Okay, so for fairness, if there's benefits, you might say there might be pitfalls too. What are those? Fair enough. Glad you asked. Well, one is some people say peer observation may not be worth doing because there might be a bias an instructor's reputation or might influence things, or maybe you have a particular pedagogical preference that's going to color how you watch someone else teach who may or may not share that preference. Then there's the we're all above average effect, you know, where, oh yeah, we're all good teachers and you know, and it's more of just a formality that we have to do this peer observation thing, but we're all going to give each other good ratings and be done with it. You know, there's that sort of dynamic that people worry about. Time intensive, we'll talk about that later. And then another issue that people raise is that peers are historically not trained to observe. Okay, you guys being the exception by coming to a session like this. And following up on the word training, the Faculty Senate proposal itself specifically has the statement, academic units, they're in charge of making sure this process happens, should ensure that observers are trained to perform their task well. So again, there is this recognition that training matters, that we can't just assume because we're peers and we teach also that we will automatically do a good job observing another person's teaching and documenting it. There are things to learn. Even preparing this talk, I learned a few fine points. I mean, it's, you know, there's always more to learn. Okay, so our agenda today, as you can see, it's going to be active. It's not just going to be me talking the whole time. First, we'll start off with a quick background quiz, so you get to be part of that. We will discuss considerations for a peer observation plan. All units are required to already have a plan, but that doesn't mean you can't continue to refine it and make it better. And you may get an idea of, oh, our plan doesn't really address this. I'll take that back to my academic unit, and maybe we can build that into the plan and make it even better. So that's another bonus of coming today. Then we will actually go through the full process or cycle of a peer observation, including a pre-conversation role play, and then hands-on experience with an instrument.
Same question for both of us. Where do we find our departmental peer observation plan?
Consult, ask your college. Ultimately, the dean's office is responsible for having the answer to that question, if not your chair.
Do you know how it trickles down to non-tenure track or tenure faculty?
We will address that. We will address that. No, it's okay. It's okay. And then we will also discuss some considerations about hybrid or online courses because they deserve attention as well. Okay, so now we have a quick background quiz. And so here is the complicated way you will let me know confidentially what your answer is. You'll show me a thumbs up if you think the statement is true, or a thumbs down if you think the statement is false. Okay? No, that's not private. You got to kind of do it like here. Kind of like the ABCD card acceptance. Okay, here's the first question. Peer observation is optional. True or false? Okay, most people are saying false. Correct answer is indeed false because, again, it is mandated by proposal our UTEP Faculty Senate has passed, and it was passed to be in place by fall of 2014. And it's not in a vacuum itself because it, in turn, was guided by work at the UT system level. So there's a lot of stuff behind this. It's not just optional. Okay? And again, the slides will be posted later, so you don't have to worry about taking notes and stuff. Question 2, true or false? Peer observation helps only new instructors of lower rank. Okay? You guys are good. False. Even experienced or high-ranking instructors benefit from giving or receiving constructive feedback. And this is very timely. Just this month in the Chronicle of Higher Education, there was a column entitled, "You're Never Too Old to Observe or Be Observed." And here's an excerpt from it that I thought was particularly helpful. What seems straightforward, just the way you call on students perhaps, is now revealed to be a pedagogical choice. And if someone else can do things differently, so can you. You get to peek inside someone else's bag of tricks to see how their magic is made. I mean, I personally learn from watching anyone teach, even if it has nothing to do with my discipline. There's always things that can be adapted. The change of perspective can be helpful to your teaching because you're in the back of the room doing this observation, and now you realize, wow, I wonder what it's like in the back of my classroom. I wonder if they can really read my board writing. Or you start thinking like this, and it's a nice way to reflect on your own stuff. I'll also add, when I've observed younger faculty or newer faculty, they're often more adept with certain technology than I am. And so I learn, so even though I may be more experienced on the pedagogical side in general, they're still doing something that I haven't used in my teaching before, just by being more literate with those kinds of things. So I know I learn from doing this, so you can too. True or false? All UTEP academic units must follow the same peer observation plan. Okay, we've got some ringers today. False. Each academic unit may tailor the plan to fit its needs and context. There's obviously a lot of difference between, say, someone giving piano lessons and someone teaching in a 500-person history lecture hall or whatever. Okay, statement 4. Peer observation can be used for formative or summative purposes. True or false? Okay, most people are saying true this time, and that is correct. But just be clear each time which purpose it is. Is there anyone who is not sure of the difference between formative and summative? Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, let's talk about that. So formative is like you're telling a story, whereas summative is like a snapshot. Formative is like when you're giving students homework to practice something. Summative is when you're seeing how they do on the common final exam at the end of the course. Formative is designed for the improvement of teaching. Summative is the evaluation of teaching, whether you're evaluating it against colleagues or some external criteria that your academic unit uses. Formative is more frequent, it's more informal, it's less public. Summative is regular, although not frequent. It's more formal, and because the stakes are higher, hopefully it is multifaceted and based on lots of different sources. Yes?
Isn't summative more like retrospective? Like when we do our annual PARs, aren't we looking back over the year as a summative?
Yeah, it's like a cumulative final exam covering everything. Exactly. Good. Okay. Now, even though the purposes are separate, they are complementary. So let me comment on that. Because if you had summative without preceding formative, that would be like, having the first assessment for students being the final exam. That's not really fair. But if you only have formative and you never have a subsequent summative, then you never get the solid confirmation that you really are improving and meeting standards. And so there is this relationship between the two of them as well. Okay, true or false? Peer observation is just observing a peer's class. Okay? Correct. There should also be communication before and after, as we will discuss and actually experience. Also, let's note that peer observation can be just one component of a much more comprehensive peer evaluation of overall teaching effectiveness. The arrow means there's more to say. This comes right from the TEDC chair and now Faculty Senate chair, Elena Izquierdo, who had a memo to the Faculty Senate when the proposal was passed. And she lists 4 things that peer observation can include. One of them, of course, is the actual observation in the classroom, but there's also the materials you use in preparing to teach, your syllabus, your assessment materials, the evaluation of the impact of teaching strategies. Again, you don't get the full picture of that if you just go into a room and then leave and that's it, right? And then documentation of continuous improvement of the course. One of the categories in the Rhoda Teaching Award packet actually is this continuous improvement idea, the idea that you teach the same class multiple times over a career, and every time you find a way to tweak it, keep making it better, so rather than just doing the same thing each time. Next question, true or false? The peer observation process is only between the observer and the observed. Okay. False. Each program and department actually has to annually discuss the process. Again, not the details of an individual person's teaching, but the overall insights gained from the process as part of program learning outcomes assessment, and identify issues that need attention. Okay? Again, this comes from the Faculty Senate memo and proposal thing. I'm just curious. Raise your hand if your academic unit has already done this.
We might have done the report
Without including the peer observation part as a component? Okay. Okay. So some have, some haven't. True or false? Only full-time faculty may be observed. From the proposal that's passed, teaching assistants, graduate student instructors, and part-time faculty making a significant teaching contribution may also be observed at the department's discretion. So that addresses your question, Adele. Okay? True or false? CTAL's instruments and process must be used. Okay? You are correct. Academic units may use or adapt CTAL options or develop their own from scratch. We don't take it personally. In fact, there's not even CTAL after, anymore. So, but it is, we felt it's important to offer something for those that don't want to create something from scratch. But if any aspect of this doesn't quite fit your discipline, your department, your needs, your context, yes, please feel free to revise accordingly. Yes?
I say that we've adapted one of CTAL's, but I thank you for laying the groundwork, right? It was very easy for us to adapt it.
Good.
So thank you.
Good. Unpaid testimonial there. Great. True or false? The most recent CTAL information or material on peer observation is this 68-page booklet that Bill Roberson compiled in 2006. The most recent. Okay. False, because in 2013-14, right after the Faculty Senate proposal was passed, CTAL created a whole resource web page that includes new instruments and information. Okay? And of course, you'll learn about that today. And finally, question 10. True or false, there are peer observation resources that apply to an online course. Okay. True, CTAL with AT, i.e. me and Steve, developed an instrument specifically for online courses, and we will discuss that today. We're going to sort of do all the parts for face-to-face first, because most of that will apply, and then we will get into the differences that are really just online specific. So that way, if there's any of you who don't ever teach online and whatever, if you want to leave at that point, I won't take it personally. Okay, so how did we do on the quiz? Did anyone get all 10 right? Awesome. The probability of that happening by chance, by the way, is less than 1 in 1,000. So that if you were just guessing that, so you're very good guessers, or you really know your stuff. Anyone miss only 1? Anyone miss only 2? Okay, excellent job, excellent job. Okay, so and again, I've kind of implied this, but just to make sure it's clear, a disclaimer before we start sharing ideas or best practices. Again, they are informed by the literature. I spend time also looking to see what other teaching centers have done and have adapted or stolen ideas from them as well. And but there is no one UTEP endorsed instrument or process. It is understood that things will vary across or even within disciplines. I mean, like I'm in the math department, but we have statisticians, pure mathematicians, applied mathematicians, and mathematics educators, which is a whole other species. And so, very different things. There are discipline-specific resources, though, like, for example, for STEM teaching, here's an example of an instrument that NSF and AAS came up with. And so you may want to take the best of ideas from a discipline-specific instrument that's just sort of out there on the national level and combine it with sort of something like the CTEL instrument and come up with something that really is tailored to your discipline even more. So again, you can be really creative with this and resourceful. I encourage you to explore. So again, the CTEL resource is merely a point of departure. Your unit can adopt, adapt, or disregard. Okay, so refining an academic unit's plan, because again, all of your academic units have a plan, even if you haven't seen it or know who has it or whatever. It exists in theory, right? And so you have the chance to bring back some ideas for them to make the plan even better, because perhaps their plan was done very quickly right before the day it was the deadline, and maybe they didn't put quite as much time into it as they could have, but it's never too late to make it better, right? Okay, so here's some questions of things that units might consider. The process, what structures will comprise the unit system for peer review of teaching, the personnel, who's going to do it, and I have more to say on that. I'll show that in a second. And the documentation, some units say all that we really need to see at the end is a letter. Others say we want to see the teaching observation instrument also, right? So there's differences like that. And then where will those just be stored in digital measures or in some other place? Who will have access to them? Only the people who are doing some sort of summative evaluation, or more people than that? These are questions each unit has to work out the answers to, and I'm sure the answers will be different between units. The frequency, there's this rule of thumb, that if you've got, if someone's already tenured, then once every 3 years is probably fine, good enough. But if they're, new and untenured, then once a year should be more, But again, that's going to vary from context to context. The scope, because different kinds of classes call for different kinds of observations. I don't think anyone, if you teach like lots of different kinds of classes, I don't think anyone's going to say that you have to have all of them observed. You might get to say, well, the one that makes the most sense to observe is not the one we're out in the field, but maybe one of the ones where we're actually in a classroom. And so you may have some say in being able to pick what you think makes the most sense, but your department may have other ideas. Preparation, what do the observers and instructors need to know? We're covering some of that today, of course. Resources, do we need to, if 1 or 2 people are going to do all the observations for a huge department, maybe they need some kind of course release time, so that needs to be factored into it, right? Or is everyone going to kind of just do one and therefore no one needs release time? And then how do we use that with assessment? So those are just some ideas. Now I said personnel had some additional comments. So the question is, who is a peer? Oh, yeah.
Maybe you're going to talk about this, but maybe I'll just wait until you do that.
Okay, fair enough. So this comes from the UT Austin document or white paper. So they say, well, as a peer, anyone who teaches in a department, is it only those with the same rank? That's a question. Some people say you should only be observed by someone of the same or higher rank. Other people say for formative, why should it be a big deal? Right? There's other things like that. I mean, like I'm a math educator. There are math educators in a different college of education. So are they more my peer than someone who's a pure mathematician within my department? I don't know. It depends, right? It depends whether the focus is content or pedagogy, so you have to think about those kind of things. What is the value of a less experienced teacher observing a more seasoned teacher, or vice versa? I would add, is content expertise needed? I mean, some people will set it up where you get observed by 2 people. Just like on a thesis committee, you've got sort of the department members, and then you have the external member who's not expected to be a disciplinary expert, but they have the outside point of view which allows them to see other stuff, right? You could take the same point of view with teaching. If you have two people observe you, and one of them is someone in your content field, but one of them is not, the person who's not isn't going to be distracted by, isn't this a cool theorem? Yeah, I love this theorem. They're going to be able to focus just on the pedagogy and not be distracted by the details of the content, right? So there's advantages to both. I'm not saying one's better or not. Having both, when you have that luxury, is probably better than having only one or the other, right? But these are things to think about because, again, they have implications for resources. So, Stacy?
But I actually want some answers to those questions.
Again,
Do you have some thoughts about those, or are you going to go into that more in the session?
Um,
Because that's one of the things I've really been struggling with,
Uh-huh.
like who should be doing these peer evaluations.
yeah, you're not going to get blanket answers out of this. I'm raising the questions to think about, but each academic unit needs to have these conversations, and they have to be the ones to come up with the answers. So. Let's talk afterwards if you feel like we. Yeah. Let's see. So should there be variety in observe? Yeah. So the variety of observers over time, rather than the same person always observing you. Do they have to have expertise in a particular methodology and techniques? That's a real question because if you just sort of assign people to whoever, then there may not be a fit with that. Anyway, so these are things.
Larry, one I
Think about
don't
it.
see here, but I think is important to address in your question
Okay.
also, is what is the motivation of the peer in conducting the observation?
Say more about that. By motivation, you mean?
The person whose teaching is being evaluated
Mhm.
needs to know the motivation, the purpose of the observation.
Right, and we will get to that when we model the whole process. So I think a lot of these things will come out in the actual experiential section. So we're almost there to it.
Also, in
Yeah.
terms of variety,
Uh-huh.
I know, I understand there's variety and rank or whatever, but variety and over time, I had my peer observation with my one person and they had comments and reports, and then the next time it's done with somebody else, how do they notice improvement?
Well, if they use a structured form, and both people use the same structured form, that could be a way to do that. If they're each just kind of doing anecdotal stuff, then you're right, it's hard to make that longitudinal documentation.
At the same time, I think diversity is a wonderful thing. I think it's great to have left-handers evaluate you and right-handers evaluate you, just as an example of getting away from pedagogy and
Yeah.
content. I think people with different perspectives can help you a lot, and that's why I say that the motivation is so important, because the whole purpose of doing this is to help the student learn more effectively. And given that, the goal of the person doing the observation needs to be, in my humble opinion, focused on your continuous quality improvement.
Okay, which is the formative perspective. Yes, Celia.
In our program, we haven't said who does it, but what I've started to do is on my own annual performance eval is to say who did mine and justify why I chose them. So
okay.
whether or not it was content or pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, I've chosen junior faculty on purpose to to model to them what active learning is, and to model to them how to use the form. But one of the things is I was told when I was going up for tenure to be that I needed to up my number of senior faculty. So before tenure, I was a lot more explicit, and I tell tenure track people to do that. But otherwise, I think it's useful to have the person justify, to think why they're choosing the people they're choosing.
That's a nice thing. In fact, with tenure, we would do that because when we solicit external reviewers, we have to give even just a 1 or 2 line thing of here's why we're asking this person, right? Yeah.
It was so awesome. The point you made about you're helping the peer, the evaluator, as well as helping yourself.
Yeah, that's what it should be about.
Awesome.
Yes.
But in terms of the motivation of the evaluator, it's interesting because I was doing a little bit of research online last night.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some programs that were set up so that the evaluator, even though we already made the point about this observation being time intensive and so on, there were some programs that were set up so that the evaluator actually had to reflect on what the observation meant for him or her after having done it? Like, what were the things that caused some self-reflection on one's own teaching after having
Nice.
done that observation? But, I don't know, the problem is that these programs are hard to sustain because people don't really buy into it because of this motivational piece, like what's in it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if you put too much into it up front, then you're going to kind of have people, I guess, protest and desist.
Right. We're aiming for that middle ground, that sweet spot.
But it would
Yeah.
be nice if there could be something that would have
Yeah.
people not only volunteer to do the observation,
Mm-hmm.
but also know for themselves
Mm-hmm.
why they're doing it and also what they got out of it.
Yeah.
in a way.
And that's why I put that quote from the Chronicle of Higher Education essay. The person really is saying, yeah, I learned a lot by watching these people, even though I've been doing this a long time. Absolutely. Thank you. Excellent comments, everyone. So here's some further things to think about. Again, is the output of this just going to be a letter? Is it going to include the instrument? Is it going to include a reflective statement, kind of like what you were just saying? Is the input going to only include the observation itself or other artifacts and documents? Are there going to be designated observers in the academic unit, or does almost everyone observe and just sort of distribute it more uniformly? Are the observations always done at a very specific, are they scheduled, or, there's one person who observed me early in my career who said, basically, give me a 2-week window and I will just drop in one of the days of that window. And I don't know if the reason for that was because she didn't know her own schedule from day to day, or whether she just wanted to kind of make it a little more random so that she would capture a typical thing. She said, just tell me what days are not test days or whatever. Give me about 2 weeks worth of dates and I'll show up at one of them. As opposed to, I'm showing up on today at this time, and So again, that's just, there's different philosophies, benefits, trade-offs, and so on. Some people teach classes that last up to 2 or 3 hours, right? And so you have to have an understanding, if someone observes you, do they have to stay for that whole class meeting, or can they watch the first hour and then leave? Because what if your coolest stuff was going to be later after that? You wouldn't, right? So you want to make sure that there's no surprises about that. Does it matter if the class observed is an undergraduate versus a graduate class? Should the observer be announced to the class? In other words, if Peter is observing today, should I announce to the class, and we have Dr. Peter Golding here today, just, or do I just assume that they won't think there's anything unusual about someone showing up in an tie and looking very distinguished and, with a clipboard, right? And then we already mentioned who can a peer be, so I won't mention that. One observation or more than one observer or more than one. How should it be different if you're doing it for summative versus formative? If it's for formative, maybe having one observation by one person is fine. But for summative, maybe you need that second observation or second observer to have something a little more solid. Is the frequency for summative and formative going to be, how will that vary by type of instructor? So a lot of this we've kind of already said, but again, the slides will be posted, and so if you want to refer back to this and take it to your academic unit, you'll be able to do that. Some observers also want to see, let me see the course evaluations you've gotten historically for this course, just so they have that as another point of reference. Or that, they'd like to have student input from a mid-course survey, perhaps. Or they'd like to actually conduct a focus group themselves. In other words, I've had the teacher, a professor I mentioned to you before who observed me early in my career. She would watch me teach for like the first hour, and then for the last 20 minutes, she would have me leave the room. And she would just talk to the students without me in the room and get further direct information from the, where she could ask things like, was that a typical class I just saw? Does he always tell jokes that are that funny, or whatever? And that gives her yet another point of reference that informed the letter that she wrote for me. And then she also asked to see my syllabus and my exams and other things too. I mean, very thorough. Almost no one else did all that. Other people would just like come to my class, and that would be it. Some observers try to look at teaching more holistically, kind of like what Peter was getting at, and ways that you advise and mentor, which goes beyond just what you do in a classroom. Other people may say, no, that's outside the scope of what this is about. So again, your academic unit has to decide how broadly to define teaching or teaching effectiveness. Some units may even want to make connections to Rhoda, because after all, if people start having on their radar that there are these other categories, then when it comes time, when Peter knocks on the door saying, hey, does your college have any Rota dossiers, they've already started thinking about it and collecting it. They already have a concept for continuous development of a course, for example, because they've been doing that. And so now they have something for that bucket on their Rota dossier. Their teaching philosophy, if they've been reflecting about their teaching, they now have something to say about their teaching philosophy and their innovations, and maybe even scholarship of teaching and learning. Discipline-related interaction with students beyond the classroom. A lot of our high-impact practices, see this slide's already out of date, now I need to call it the UTEP Edge, right? But that kind of stuff where you're doing these things outside the classroom, that's something that you're going to be documenting naturally anyway to support the UTEP Edge. Well, it's also a category in the Rota dossier. So these are things to be making these connections. That can be another thing. Okay, so that's enough with refining the plan. Okay, so to implement the observation, again, as you said in the true or false quiz, it does involve more steps than just watching a class, and therefore more hours. Okay, we're not going to pretend otherwise. And so the literature breaks this down into 4 steps, and we're going to model all 4 steps, basically. There's a pre-conversation, there's the actual observation, there's the post-conversation, and then there's a reflective summary. Oh, we almost had all 4 rhyme. Okay, reflective summary could be distillation. How about that? So we have conversation, observation, conversation, distillation. How about that? Okay? So, yeah, no, sorry. So it all rhymes. Okay, so we're going to focus on step 1 first. We'll just kind of go in order. And when we're all done, we'll have more chance for questions and things as well. Okay, and so some suggestions for the pre-conversation. First, try to do it, fairly close to the observation. I'll say within a week would be a reasonable target. Verify that it's actually, this is going to be something that we model, right? Okay, so I need a volunteer for a role play. Art, you're in the front row. Let's bring you up. And so this is perfect because Art is in my department, so he actually is a peer. And so we are going to model what it would be like if I met with Art and asked him some questions in preparation for me observing one of his classes. Okay?
Disclaimer that I knew I was going to be volunteered.
But you didn't know anything else.
But we didn't talk about it. I brought in the notes for tomorrow's class, and here we are.
Okay, Art, how you doing today?
Okay, what's up?
Good. So I know I'm looking forward to getting a chance to see you teach.
Yeah.
Are you okay with me using the instrument from the CETL website, the 2013 form?
Yeah, that's one I use when I'm doing observations.
Excellent. And okay, so I'm filling out the pre-observation background form now. What is the name of the course in the section?
It's discrete math, 2300. I'd have to look up the section number.
Okay, no, that's fine, 2300. And the location, the room it is?
It is Liberal Arts 203.
Okay, 203. Is there anything about the room I should be aware of? Like, are there constraints of where the teacher, the students seating that affect the teaching that you'd like to comment on in advance?
Sure. So in the back of the room, for some reason, there's a couple of these big tables, so it's a little bit scrunched in the back. But fortunately, we've lost a few students. Everybody does fit now. At the front, it's what used to be a nice, big, long blackboard, but is now covered up by a screen a lot, so I have to juggle between the blackboard and the screen. There's a document camera, which I use a lot, and you'll see we're going to do homework solutions with that tomorrow. There's a little bit of an impediment in the document camera because there's a telephone right where you'd want to put the papers, and you can't move the phone and you can't move the document camera. But the students seem to have adjusted around that. And it's a little dark in the front because the lights are set up for the screen and not for the blackboard.
Okay. And so tomorrow's the day. That won't be a film or a field trip or a test day or.
There'll be a quiz at the beginning.
Okay.
If you like, we could talk about next Monday or the next day. But I thought tomorrow's the beginning of a section, so in that sense, it might be better.
Okay. And remind me of the time of the class.
It's 10:30 to. Make sure I get this right. 10:30 to 11:20.
10:30 to 11:20. Okay. How many students are enrolled?
Right now, I believe the official enrollment is 41. There's one student who's only shown up twice, and I need to try to find out more what's going on.
Mhm.
Typical attendance would be, we might have maybe about 3 or 4 absent. On the quiz day,
Okay.
it might be even less, so probably there's about 30 to 40 students there.
So when there's quizzes, they always know that in advance that there's going to be a quiz.
It's been announced in advance.
Okay, okay.
And on the website and all that good stuff.
Okay.
And it's every Friday.
Okay. Could you tell me a little bit about the learning objectives for the course and for the particular lesson that I'll be seeing?
Okay, so discrete math is a diverse, I should have brought the syllabus as well, I didn't think to do that. Diverse course, it's got 3 sections. The first part is sets, functions, relations, stuff like that. And the next part will be combinatorics and then graph theory. So we're at the very end of that first part, and in particular we're going to be talking about induction. And induction is a new thing for most or all of the students. Some of them are math majors, some of them are computer science majors. And I tell the computer science majors that even though we're doing induction, which is a math thing, they're going to do recursion, which is the computer science analog to it. In fact, yesterday in Wednesday's class, I handed out a project that they'll be doing over the week on their own time that introduces them to the idea of recursive thinking.
So this course is for it's not just for majors. Other majors use
It's
it.
mostly math majors and computer science majors. It's required
Okay.
for some or all math majors,
Mhm.
and it's required for all computer science majors. And I haven't looked into it lately. I think occasionally I get like double E majors, and also education majors who are going to become math teachers also have to take it.
Okay. Do you have any assessments planned of student performance during the lesson other than the quiz?
So there's the quiz, which we'll go over after I administer it, and then usually at the beginning of class, and tomorrow will be no exception, we go over some homework problems. One thing that's an exception is I did get to go through some of those homework problems yesterday, so tomorrow there's just one problem left, but it's a good one. And so the assessment is part that one student, I try to call them at random. I have my little box of index cards that they've all written their names on. This one's tricky enough that perhaps no one will volunteer, and I'm sorry, that several cards that I go through will be someone who says, oh, I didn't do it, or I was studying for the quiz. So whoever does come out, they're getting some assessment. Plus, as they're discussing, hopefully they'll get something wrong, and then we can talk about it, and then I can be seeing what the responses are for the students. This doesn't go into any assessment for the course per se. This is a class where the students are not graded for participation at all, but that gives me an assessment of how the class overall is doing. Right? There's lots of questions about a particular part, or a lot of people agree with something that was done incorrectly, and that means I know I need to say more about that particular bit. And that's going to be something about functions that are one-to-one or onto.
Okay. Should I just sit somewhere in the back of the room, or do you have a strong preference for me to be anywhere other than that?
Back of the room or the side of the room is probably good.
Okay.
That way you can see what's going on.
Is there anything in particular you'd like me to make sure I noticed or to look for that you've been wondering about in your teaching, that you are wondering if you do something or do something well? Or
My handwriting, am I loud enough in the back?
Okay.
And then when I'm calling on students, and I try to use the cards to get myself to randomize, but am I favoring some particular group of students? Am I relying too much on volunteers? And it might come up that there's a question, and maybe it's a hard question. Am I waiting long enough or too long? Something like that. Am I writing, now I know a good one that's come up lately, am I writing enough stuff down on the board when we get to the more lecture-y part of stuff? I have a bad habit, I recognize, of saying stuff and not writing it down, because that way we can go faster. Which doesn't really work.
Okay. So you can send me the syllabus and other documents later, and that way I'll be able to see it. I think we're all set. Do you have any questions about the process?
I haven't told you about what's actually going to happen during class.
Oh, okay, yeah, good.
So we are going to talk about induction, and so I would have in my notes what we're doing specifically. We'll start with a particular summation. I'll just show it to you so we don't have to more people with technical details.
Oh, wow, this is great stuff.
Yeah. And so I'm introducing summation notation. I'm really introducing the idea of induction. And so a big part of it is, do they get this process, the big picture, not just this one particular problem. I should also say one thing that's tricky about this problem, as you know from induction, is that I'm going to put up some problem. What's 1 plus 4 plus 7 plus da da da? And they have to basically guess the answer. And one tricky part about induction is that it doesn't help you find that formula. It's just, okay, I'm gonna literally make a big deal out of it. Just pull this formula out of there. I'm gonna make it really look like this is really amazing. How did I know this? And hide any technique of deriving it, because the focus of this is on verifying the formula works with this technique of induction and not with deriving the formula.
Cool. So we get to do formative evaluation of your teaching summation. This is great. So do you have any questions about the process, or are we all set?
I should say one more thing about when we actually do this part. So I'll have to do some part where I'm up at the front of the room and doing something resembling lecture. But when I ask them to figure out the sum, I'm going to let them work in small groups to say, well, what do you think the formula is? Can you come up with a formula? And then it's going to be a big reveal. Well, how do we know that it's true? And then I have to talk about induction, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time that I can incorporate them as I go through the steps of this process.
Great. I look forward to seeing you.
Great. And are we going to talk about this after the observation?
You bet.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Your hands are up. In fact, we have a special little gift for our volunteer. This will be a collector's item since CETL is going away, but
Large.
a Nessus CETL t-shirt.
Oh, this is true. I have wanted one of these for years.
Okay, so thank you, Art. So you can see some of the things that we did. I verified that it wasn't going to be on a day where it doesn't make sense to observe. We talked about gathering materials, getting the context of the course as well as of the lesson. Asked him for any particular challenges that he faced either in the physical setup of the room or his own monitoring of his own practices. We agreed on the instrument that would be used. Any questions about the process, he had a chance to ask those. The first page of the CETL form, which you either have with you or is on your laptop, or Carla can pass out if you need one. Oh.
I'm sorry to ask that. I was up here. I could have done this. In terms of the instrument, I would have liked to have gone through and said this section is perhaps more relevant than that. I just thought of that.
Oh, okay. Sure. Fair enough. And that would have been a fair thing to bring up then. Absolutely. Yeah. So again, the CETL website, where it says peer observation, here's where you can click on the observation form. And notice that there's a PDF and a Word version, and it's made where you can fill it in and then save it to your laptop and print it off later. So, and in fact, when we do the demonstration of a teaching lesson where you'll watch an excerpt of a lesson, at your laptop you can actually practice using that form, and then we'll debrief on that. But that's coming up in a little bit longer. So again, the pre-observation background, and see when Harry and I were drafting this, again back in fall 2013, originally some of this was just part of the regular observation form. And I said, wait, once someone's in the room trying to notice all these things, that's not the time to write down anything that could have already been written down in advance. And so I wanted to separate out anything that can be written down in advance should be, so that that's done. And now you go in and only focus on the observation. And so, again, the discussion I just modeled with Art has these things in it. The learning objectives are already filled in from my conversation with Art. The planned assessments already filled in. The instructor comments about the layout of the room. All that is already recorded, so that I don't have to think about taking the time, much less what's the time of the class and the section of the class and the room number of the class. I don't want to mess with that when I'm in the room trying to do the observation. Okay, and so so we just did the role play. But again, this is something that you could take this technique and take it back to your academic unit and recreate this with a colleague in front of you at a department meeting. And because I think a lot of people just aren't used to having that pre-meeting. They just say, okay, by email, they arrange the day and time they're going to show up, and then they just show up, and there's no pre-conversation at all. And it's not like the pre-conversation has to take an hour. We covered a lot of ground in 8 minutes, whatever it was. But have that conversation. It just grounds things. It makes sure you're on the same page, and it just makes it a more collegial process, as it should be. Yeah, maybe we should have made both of these smiley faces because we're both happy, right? The observer and the observer. So, all right. So now we're ready for step 2, the actual observation. And so some tips for that: make sure that you don't just watch what the instructor's doing, that you sit somewhere where you can also notice what's going on with the students. Do they seem engaged? Are they texting? Are they talking to their neighbor? What are they doing? Don't intervene. Hopefully that would go without saying, but every now and then you hear stories where someone makes an error at the chalkboard and the observer says, oh, like, hold yourself back. You can always tell them later. Don't do that. Obviously, if they're about to kill a student, you have to intervene. But resist the urge to compare with your pedagogical style. Okay, you may be really into hands-on discussions and group work and stuff, and now you've been assigned to watch someone who does nothing but lecture. I mean, sometimes we give lecture too bad of a name, and like it's the evil thing to always avoid. I think it still has its place, and there are people that lecture really well in a way that engages students. There are also plenty of people that lecture in a way that does not engage students at all, right? But to try to kind of hold your own personal preferences and biases at a distance, and try to appreciate what they do on their own terms for their context, just as you would do if you observe someone who's from a very different discipline. You wouldn't judge that discipline by the standards of your discipline, right? We were just talking about this, how different the world of sociology is from earth science or whatever, right? Yeah. Okay. Try to use an instrument that has structured parts and open-ended parts. Obviously, you want to avoid either extreme. If it's too structured, where you don't have there's no space to also just sort of put an impression of something that wasn't really covered by the checklist, that's not good. But if the whole thing is just open-ended with no specific things to make sure you get around to noting, that's not good either. And so Harry and I really tried to craft something that would split the difference, that wouldn't be so detailed that it would just be too overwhelming to, you don't want a checklist of 162 things to look for. It's just too much, right? But you also don't want something just to be too loose and open-ended. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to show you a clip of teaching. Okay, yeah. So in picking and using an instrument, there's some checklists like in this book. This book has a variety of instruments as examples. One of the examples is this kind of yes/no checklist. Did you observe it or not? And to me, that's really limiting, because just whether you observed it or not doesn't tell you if it was effective, right? So what does that even? I don't know what that really does. So the checklists are very limited, but you don't want to have too many things to rate. People get fatigued really fast if they have a 1 to 5 scale on 80 items. I mean, you're just not going to keep up with that. And again, no matter what the style is, to recognize that every style has things about it that are most effective and least effective. Make sure that whatever instrument it is, it addresses classroom climate and communication and discourse. Again, fill out the background stuff in advance, and be familiar with the instrument before you observe. In other words, you might say, oh yeah, we just trust CTEL's instrument, it'll be great. I don't have to look at it before I go in there. And then you go in there, and now you're looking at the instrument for the first time as the class is already happening. That's not good. If you already are familiar with the kinds of things that are on the instrument, then that will guide you to fill out efficiently, because you're not having to really read it for the first time in the moment. So that's, again, a lot of this is common sense, but not everyone does that. Okay, so the observation form, again, can be found at the CTEL peer observation page. Some of you have it pulled up on your laptops. Others of you have. Does anyone need a hard copy? Because Carla brought some hard copies of it if you need. Everyone's already got? Okay, great. So just to kind of a guided tour of it. So again, the pre part, we don't have to go over that. So it's the next 3 pages of it. One thing that's in there is just sort of like a schematic of the room, and I realize even now that this doesn't apply to everything, because people who teach in the scale-up room, there is no front of the room. It's totally decentered, right? But in a more typical setting where there is a front of the room, then this gives you a chance to let the instructor know, are they kind of like engaging with all quadrants of the room? Because maybe they're left-handed and they just have this bias to only looking at the left side of the room, and they just kind of leave these people out, And so that's why that's in there, because again, it's a small thing, but if it's not noticed, it can't be corrected, right? And so this is the part that is kind of open-ended, like ethnographic. Don't worry if you don't know what that word means. But basically, every time the teacher does a new type of thing, you put that there. But in parallel, you say, and what are the students doing when that happens? And so maybe every 5 minutes, there's a different mode to kind of report or whatever. It's expandable, so you can make that section go on as long as you need to. So that's the part that's sort of fairly loose in some sense. But then there's some, oh, and by the way, this is kind of a fun graphic. From the Journal of College Science Teaching, they did something like this, where every time the teacher did something different, they kind of tracked what the student level of engagement was. And what they found is, as you can see, most of the low points happen to be at moments of lecture. and most of the high points were like when they were asked a clicker question, or when a real-world example was given, or the instructor posed a question, And it's kind of fascinating to think about every lesson you teach having a trajectory. It's not just everything's great, everything's great, everything. It's have, no matter how you teach, you're going to have some ups and downs and some crescendos and moments of collecting yourself for the next climb, right? And so, so you may not actually try to think of it quite this literally as a graph. But I think there is something to this, to think about the trajectory of a lesson. Okay, then discourse patterns. And again, while it's fresh, you want to complete right after the session. And again, even though maybe we didn't do a perfect job of this, what Harry and I were aiming for was to describe the discourse patterns as matter-of-factly as possible, and not unduly say, and this is clearly the best one, and this is clearly the evil one or whatever. So just again, when the instructor posed a question where no one posed an answer, what was the most common thing the instructor did? And again, most common thing, because it might have happened once one way and 5 times another way. You want the trend, you want the most. So did the instructor break down the question into simpler questions to try to help them get back up to the original question? Did they have the students try to discuss it in small groups? Did the instructor just go ahead and answer the question, him or herself, or some other method? Okay, again, just what was the dominant thing that they did? When students answered a question, what was the most thing that the instructor did? Did the instructor just sort of move on, or did the instructor kind of probe and ask for an elaboration and try to extend the discussion? Or again, other. We're always open to other things that we didn't think of. And then what was the dominant discourse pattern? So was it mainly, and again, this is from the student point of view. So one mode is that the students are mainly silent because the teacher's doing all the talking. Okay? Just a neutral matter of fact, the student is silent because they're not talking, literally. Okay. Or from the student point of view, that it's a controlled thing where the students, the instructor poses and answers questions, but it's all going through the instructor, basically. In other words, you never hear a student talk and then another student talk without the instructor talking in between. It's always everything's going through the instructor. So the instructor is maintaining that sort of control. Or active, where the teacher is more of a facilitator and the students are having conversations among themselves. Whether it's during a whole room thing or a deliberate small group thing. And again, recognizing that some classes don't completely fit into only one of those, we also allow the options of it's a mixture of silent and controlled, or a mixture of controlled and active. Now I'm sure you're thinking, what about silent and active? I guess we just didn't think that those would overlap. That if, so we didn't put that on there. But maybe in your notes you would say, yeah, they were actually silent and active. I don't know. And then classroom climate. So we, again, have always, mostly, sometimes, never, the instructor calling on people by name, responding respectfully, looking at all parts of the room. Those, again, just sort of classroom climate things that should be fairly quick to write down. Again, if you're already familiar with the instrument, you can look for these during the class and really kind of get the gist of it. There were a few things, though, where I felt like, we originally had everything with always, mostly, sometimes, never. But for some things, it's just yes or no. Like, if someone says something offensive, I mean, I don't care if that only happens once. That's that's too much, right? So that's just a yes no. So that's why you have a different heading there. And then assessment activities completed by students to show understanding. And then again, having some open-ended items like what was the balance of use of the time between the teacher stuff and the student stuff. Again, trying to be non-judgmental about this, because for some kinds of lessons need to be more teacher-heavy than student-heavy, because the students kind of need a lot of initial structure and guidance to be able to do it, right? But then there's other things where the teacher needs to just find a way to get out of the way as quickly as possible and let the students be most of the focus. And so, was the balance appropriate for that lesson, for those goals? It's very context relative. And no matter how good or how bad the lesson is, there's always something you can say that was most effective, and always something you can say was the least effective. So that you're not judging the entire lesson on a 0 to 10 scale. You're just saying what was most effective, what was least effective. Okay? So and then there's additional comments, so that anything that Harry and I still didn't think of, you can still put in. Lindsay?
How would that be assessed? While you're in the classroom, how are you assessing learning moments?
So assessment can be very informal. You might give a quiz, or you might just pose a clicker question, and you see from that whether students are getting what you're doing. You're checking in to see if they're understanding in real time, rather than waiting for next month's midterm.
No. I understand
Oh.
that part, but if I'm filling this out,
Yes.
how would I know which one were effective learning moments for students if I'm not the student, and I'm not asking the students, and I'm not assessing the students?
Oh, you're right. Fair enough. So it's obviously going to be in the observer's perception. Unless you personally talk to the students, you can't be for sure that it was. Fair enough. That's a good point.
Perhaps you could ask for 5 minutes at the end of class.
Exactly.
Questions to the students first.
Yeah. Excellent point. Thank you both. Okay, so now we get to have a scaled down, hands-on experience with that 2013 Lesser Musin instrument. So the challenge of trying to, so I was trying to figure out, okay, because I want to give you guys hands-on practice with a particular instrument, and then we can check in with each other and see how that was. One thing was to actually teach a lesson, but then there's the issue of, you already love people like me in art, so that's or if you don't think we're doing a good job, maybe you want to spare our feelings and not be as fully honest. So we want to take that off the table. So we didn't want to make it like a live thing with people And there's a lot of footage like on YouTube of people teaching and stuff like that. And most of it, if there's just a camera in the back of the room, it doesn't, it's not going to catch. It's very hard to find footage where you can see and hear what the instructor's doing, read what's on the slides and on the board, and capture what the students are doing. Unless whoever's behind the camera is really actively zooming in and moving around. If it's just a planted camera, it's rare that that's going to be good. So I learned that by searching a lot. But anyway, but the Michelle Jackson came to my rescue. I posted to the pod listserv. That's the CTAL people who direct CTALs, and asking, hey, does anyone know of a good clip for this purpose? And so I got a great suggestion. So this is where I got this from. So the context is. You're going to see the first 12 minutes of a ESL, English as a Second Language, teaching demonstration from a college in Japan. So it's different enough from our context where you can look at it objectively, although because we have a lot of English learners here at UTEP, you may feel that there's more parallels than at first you might have thought. So have your instrument ready. And we will now watch the first 12 minutes of this demonstration.
Everybody needs a pencil. Pencil. Or a pen, of course. A pen is fine. Pencil. part of studying any foreign language course. But in the Department of International Studies here at Scotia Women's College, we do more than just study grammar and do tests. We also learn something called self-expression. Let's see if I can get the button to work. Nope. Yes. Up. We also focus on self-expression, self-development. Learning English, or learning any other foreign language for that matter, is learning a new form of self-expression. Self-expression. It's a new way to express yourself. It's like getting new eyes, a new set of ears, a new voice. And for some people, it's like getting a new identity altogether. Today I'm going to introduce you to the idea of descriptive English. Descriptive English. Descriptive English creates vivid images in people's minds, like a movie, like a DVD in the head. It uses all the senses, the sense of sight, the sense of sound, the sense of smell, the sense of touch, the sense of taste. I forgot the sense of taste. It uses all of the senses of the body. And descriptive English shows. It shows. It doesn't tell the message that it wants to communicate. It shows through the body the message. And there are many ways to show, not tell, in English. There are many, many ways. For example, comparisons. You are beautiful, like a flower. And you are dynamic, like a waterfall. And you are more valuable than a diamond. This is descriptive English, and it makes movies in the head. Descriptive English makes what you say clear and strong and memorable. People remember what you say, what you write, when you use vivid descriptive English. Today I'm going to show you what descriptive English is by example. I'm going to play a song for you that is rich in descriptive language. It's simple English, but it's powerful because it is rich in descriptive language. Okay, so please listen to the song. I'm going to dim the lights, but not completely, so you can see page 1 and page 2. Please fill in the missing words, and afterwards I'll tell you the answers, and we'll do a little bit of pronunciation practice at the same time. So, beautiful flower.
This is a song for every girl who's ever been through something she thought she couldn't make it through. Yeah, I sing these words because I was that girl too, wanting something better than this, but who do I turn to? Now we're moving from the darkness into the light. Yeah. This is the defining moment of our lives. Cause you're beautiful like a flower, more valuable than a diamond. You are powerful like a fire. You will heal the world with your mind. be finding moments of our lives. 'Cause you're beautiful like a flower, more valuable than a diamond. You are powerful like a fire. You will heal the world with your mind. There is nothing in the world that you cannot do when you believe in you. Who are beautiful, yeah you. Who are brilliant, yeah you. Who are powerful, yeah you. Who are resilient, yeah you. Who are beautiful, yeah you. Who are brilliant, yeah you. Who are powerful, yeah you. Who are resilient, yeah you. Oh, yeah you. Hey, yeah you. Yeah you. Yeah you. Yeah you. Yeah you. Yeah you. Yeah you.
Pretty song, yes? Beautiful song. She is one of my favorite singers. She is very young and very talented, not much older than most of you. She writes her own music, she plays, she chooses her musicians, she self-produces. She's very, very amazing. Okay, let's go over the answers together, and because we don't have a lot of time, I'm not going to go through the whole song, just the sentences with the missing words. Could you please repeat the words after me for a little bit of pronunciation practice? Every little bit of practice helps. Okay, in a big loud voice. Number one, this is a song for every girl. Anybody? Who's? Very good. It's two words in English. Two words in English combined. Who has? Whose? Everybody, whose? Bigger voice. Whose? Yeah, nice. That's W-H-O apostrophe S. One more time. Can I hear a big loud voice? Whose? Nice. Number two, wanting something better than this, but oh, not what? Anybody? Same? Who? Everybody, who? Not who has, just who do I? I will demonstrate. Turn. Everybody, who do I turn to? T-U-R-N. And I'm sorry, number two is W-H-O. Right, somebody's listening. Okay, number four. Now we're moving from the darkness into the light. Beautiful, great pronunciation. Everybody, light. Light. Oh, that is not everybody. Everybody, light. Nice, thank you. Number four, this is a difficult one. Anybody? Okay, it's good word to know. Defining, everybody. Defining. Define, like definition. Defining. D-E-F-I-N-I-N-G.
Okay, so that's the first 12 minutes, like I promised. Take a moment and fill out other parts of the form that you didn't already fill out, and then we will debrief after that. Thanks for coming. Oh, cool. Mm. Thank you. Okay, so let's just kind of go in order of this form here. So the first thing to observe is just, what were sort of like, what were the, how many distinct periods of things going on did you note? I'm just curious. How many rows did you guys fill out on this? Hold up how many fingers or whatever, yeah. 3, 5, 4. Okay. Everyone's going to break it down a little differently. Like I'll share what I did. I said, okay, the first thing is she's passing out pencils amidst the rows of desks, and then she's getting students to do something in unison, counting from 10 down to 1, and then she makes sort of makes a joke, She revealed from the screen the 3 main points, sort of a graphic organizer. That was sort of like a moment that I thought was worthy of noting. Then she lowered the screen to show the video of the India Ari song. And then after that, then she, had students call out answers. And so those were sort of my, did anyone have any additional activities that they broke down into? Yeah.
She was acting.
Mm-hmm.
And also before playing the song, she's actually giving some example. And what I like is this example is actually come from the song itself. So there's a connection between them.
Yeah. Lindsay, you had a comment? Or?
I don't think I'm good at this because I didn't have as many details as you did. But I did notice, because we had to do what this teacher was doing and what the student was
Right,
doing.
right.
And as she was walking the room, even though she was doing back and forth, none of the students looked at her. They just looked at the front while they were just listening.
Right.
But they were looking at her even though she was working the room.
Yeah, or at least the front half of the room. I don't know if she made it to the back half of the room, but she was going back and forth in that aisle. Yeah.
They made no contact.
Yeah. Now, in fairness, the title of the video is A Teaching Demonstration. So in other words, this isn't necessarily like her class. So what I'm imagining the context was either this is one of these like orientations for prospective freshmen or something, like if you come to our university, here's a taste of what you'll see, or maybe it was her class and it was just sort of like they just needed to create a teaching demo. And so it wasn't like necessarily a natural setting.
That was what I was going to ask further down.
Yeah.
Because I've used cameras in the classroom, and after all, students don't care because they're so busy doing whatever they're doing.
Right.
But I wasn't able to tell because it was a different culture, if the students usually don't make eye contact with the professor and they're just, she's walking by.
Culture could definitely be a thing. Yeah. And because we didn't want to show an example where everything was A+. We deliberately wanted something where you could notice some things that could have been better. Yeah.
But I think that's really an interesting observation because as an observer, even somebody looking at this as a promotional video, somebody from the outside might think, oh, why aren't the students having a good time?
Yeah.
The teacher's working herself out. But that's a cultural issue, right? You have to be aware of the class culture, and it can be like some discipline that's really far removed from your own discipline, or it can be actually the culture of the people that you are observing as a non-Japanese person, for example.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
my friend just went as a visiting physician in Japan, where she's a biology professor. She's like, oh my God, I hated it because I played videos, I gave activities, and they were quiet. Like I was there for a week and nobody talked. They didn't talk to each other.
So there is cultural thing. Interesting.
They didn't ask me questions. I was bored because I was going all like this, and they're like. So.
I almost felt like she was scaring them because it was so different than what they were used to in the classroom, and they were just like they didn't even know what to think about.
Art, you had a comment?
So for both the video and for your friend, then, and not to be too harsh on anyone, but then it's not working. You're trying to work the room, and if they're not responding, then that's probably not what you're trying to do. And so, and I don't know how you fix this. It's the cultural thing. Maybe you can't. But she was trying to do something, and I don't think it was having the desired effect.
Just a quick question. For that video, is it a model demonstration for people coming to their college to watch?
I'm not sure what the purpose of the video making it was, but it was called a teaching demonstration. So take that for what it may be.
I think it's a very good example of what we need to realise, which is that the classroom is not about us. The classroom is about students learning. That's why I say if I had to choose two words, I'd say what the teacher was doing was acting.
Yeah, gestures, I mean, she really, yeah.
It was a great performance, but
right.
But this, what the students were doing was nothing. So it was, from my perspective, it was a complete.
Well, nothing because we're looking for particular ways for them to react that we're used to perhaps in a US-based classroom. Yeah, I mean, you know, we saw 12 minutes, I don't know. But they're thinking, I hope.
Yeah, the interesting thing would be when you know, if the teacher left the room and then you ask the students.
They might not tell you.
Well, yeah.
You know, there is such a thing as active listening. So,
Mm-hmm.
and how do we measure student learning if the students are less
Demonstrative or
than the ones who are
yeah.
listening to?
Yeah.
I think they all shut down when she's making a joke about having a test. Some of our students would appreciate that.
That might have backfired. That's a good point.
Students that are really serious and they think they're going to take a test, they go into that mode and they
Right.
can't get them out of that.
And
Yeah.
I think this particular lesson is just for student is just too difficult to interact with teacher because the level of English is not that high enough to have a normal, you know, conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I
Yeah,
think there's a difficulty of, you know, responding to teachers' questions.
I wondered at the level of the class, because if she could ask them to fill in a word like whose and then a word like resilient, I was like, you know.
Show it on the board.
So
Yeah.
I was wondering
Yeah.
what level are they?
And
All right.
also because this, I didn't see this, I don't mind they are not talking, but there was no writing, there was no note taking, it was just, there was no movement at
Uh-huh.
all. So I did, if I was filling out that part.
Right, you've got some things to say there.
And I would have been like,
Yeah.
I don't.
Let's continue going through this form and just make sure we all. So when the instructor asked a question that resulted in no answers, and that did happen a few times, what was the most common thing you observed the instructor to do?
She answered.
Or she repeated it and, you know, or, yeah, exactly. When students answered a question, what was the most common response by the instructor?
She expanded on the meaning.
Okay, a few times that happened. How would you describe the discourse pattern? Silent, controlled, or active? Pretty much silent, yeah. Did you hear any student ask a question?
No, not asking,
But the answer.
Was there an invitation for a student to ask a question? No. Right, so silent, yeah, that's you know, I guess you could say a mix of silent and controlled also, but silent is probably the better choice. Let's see if we agree on classroom climate. The instructor addressed students by name, always, mostly, sometimes, never. Never. The instructor addressed and responded to students respectfully. Always, okay. The instructor looked at students in all parts of the room, turned in their direction, and provided a sense of inclusion for all students. Okay. The instructor walked throughout the entire room.
Did she make it all the way to the back?
No.
She went up the road, so that's like.
I would call that mostly because, you know, she worked the front half of the room very well, but didn't make it to the back, so I'd call that mostly. Student behavior suggested they were comfortable interacting with the instructor. I might just say NA to that one. I don't know. It was just, yeah. Instructor kindly and constructively provided goal-related feedback students could use to improve their learning and performance. Okay. So again, not always in a 12-minute excerpt of a teaching demonstration. It's sort of, you know, take it for what it's worth. There's some limitations there, obviously. If students disconnected from the learning process, the instructor appropriately redirected their attention. Not applicable. Okay. The instructor demonstrated enthusiasm. Yeah, I would say always. I mean, she was on. Instructor asked questions beyond mere fact recall. At best sometimes, but maybe just never. It depends on, you know, where you are in the Bloom's taxonomy thing. A noticeable number of students arrived late or left early. Nope, everyone was there. Did you hear disrespectful stuff? Offensive stuff? No. Did you hear from the instructor or the students? No, no. Okay, so that was...
I thought there was one comment that was very telling to the teacher, mate.
Okay.
Which is when a student responded. I believe she said something like, "Oh, you were listening."
Mm.
Did you hear that?
Yes, I did, and then I thought, wow, they were all listening, aren't they? Yeah.
And did you interpret that as something kind or patronizing when she said that? I mean...
I think she's
Oh.
surprised. Yeah.
Oh, like she was expecting them to be...
She's not expecting them
Wow.
to be listening.
That is telling then.
My suspicion is that she just want to demonstrate to people this is how you should teach in a different culture.
Uh-huh.
Because they are not going to respond to you, but don't give up. You
Yeah.
just entertain them slowly, they
Okay.
will learn the way. Because what happened, I was in Singapore, when we have a general paper in Singapore, that is my A level, it's from America, the way they did it, oh, that's interesting. It's very similar.
Wow. Flashbacks.
It was a surprise, but it was fun, because
Yeah.
it's unlike what we normally do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Give her enough time, it's fun.
Okay.
Like you remember, but this is an example. Maybe her message is don't give up, slowly, they will respond. So maybe that it has a value, but a lot of time, if they don't respond, then I change my strategy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll give you an example.
that's-
One example of how she changed her behaviour of interacting with students that changed the class dramatically. She is teaching English, but if she had said at some point, let's say with the word resilient, so how do I say that word resilient in katakana, in Japanese language?
¿Cómo se dice?
Yeah. She gained there, but she was learning Japanese.
Ah.
They were learning English.
Oh.
She would find a totally different
Wow.
opportunity.
Does she even speak Japanese though, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes,
Japan, she should probably know some.
not always.
It demonstrates an effort.
I thought she used one word early in the lesson, just one word of Japanese to, maybe.
She could agree with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if the lesson went on and she actually said, okay, this song was about you're beautiful like a flower. What else could you be beautiful like? And solicited some answers.
Like a math teacher. Yeah. Lots of things.
Right.
Yeah.
Waited for some answers back.
Right.
Beautiful like maybe a rose or, some other thing. But just
Oh,
waited
yeah.
for them
Nice.
to respond. There's nothing wrong with waiting.
I think she was very focused on trying to get to this
Yeah,
video. It's
exactly.
after,
She
this
had-
is my favorite singer, and this is clearly the highlight of that part of it.
Mhm.
That became the focus at the exclusion of these other things.
At
Wow.
the same time, we've been quite critical because we don't understand the context at all.
Right.
This might have been an acting episode when she was asked to act.
Fair enough.
She did an awesome job.
So there's some additional stuff I want to make sure we get to. So these are great comments, but let's maybe come back to them if towards the end. I think the last page we don't need to say too much about. I think we saw the things that she did to assess student knowledge. We saw that things that were effective were the walking around the room and the use of gestures, but that there were some least effective things as well to note, like the students not being invited to ask questions or talk to their peers and that sort of thing. So.